Imagine walking into a restaurant to celebrate a special family night, only to be told you're not welcome. Humiliated, you prepare to leave, but within minutes, the entire story takes a shocking turn. The family everyone ignored ends up owning the very restaurant that tried to shut them out. How did it happen? Stay tuned, this story is filled with one twist after another. The restaurant doors chimed softly as James Carter held them open for his wife Evelyn and their 2 children. Their smiles were warm, and their laughter light, as they stepped into the upscale dining establishment. Tonight was special, they were there to celebrate their wedding anniversary. James wore a tailored suit, while Evelyn's dress sparkled under the dim ambient lighting. Their 2 children followed closely, faces glowing with excitement. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations, the clinking of silverware, and the occasional laughter of diners enjoying their evening. James approached the hostess stand with a polite smile. "Good evening. We have a reservation under Carter, 4-4. The hostess glanced at her list, her expression neutral, before hesitating. Her eyes shifted to a tall, sharply dressed man nearby, Greg Whitman, the restaurant manager. Clipboard in hand, he carried an air of authority as he briskly approached. "Good evening," Greg said, his tone clipped. "I'm Greg Whitman, the manager. Unfortunately, there seems to have been a mistake with your reservation. We're fully booked tonight." James frowned in confusion but remained calm. "That's strange. I confirmed the reservation this morning. There are plenty of empty tables here. Could you double-check?" Greg's smile tightened as he shook his head. "I assure you, sir, there are no available tables. Perhaps another restaurant might better suit your needs." Evelyn's smile faltered as unease settled over their family. The children glanced nervously at each other, sensing the tension. James straightened his shoulders. "I see. Thank you for letting us know." He turned to his wife and children, saying softly, "Let's go." As they walked toward the door, Evelyn whispered, "What just happened? Why would they turn us away like that?" James gave her a reassuring glance but said nothing, his jaw tightly clenched. Nearby, an older man in a crisp business suit had been observing the interaction. His sharp eyes followed the Carter family as they moved toward the exit. Setting down his drink deliberately, he rose from his seat and called out in a firm voice, "Excuse me." James paused at the door and turned toward the man. Evelyn and the children also stopped, curious and uneasy. The man, tall with silver streaks in his hair, approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, is it?" he asked. James hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I'm James Carter. I'm sorry if we disturbed you." "Not at all," the man replied smoothly, extending a hand. "I'm Mr. Patterson, a frequent guest here. I couldn't help but notice the situation." Greg, who had been watching from the hostess stand, quickly intervened. "Mr. Patterson, I assure you this is a misunderstanding. We're simply at capacity tonight." Patterson turned to Greg, his warm smile fading into a stern glare. "Is that so? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you just refused service without valid reason. I counted at least 4 empty tables when I arrived." Greg stiffened, his face flushing as diners began murmuring among themselves. Patterson continued, his tone sharp. "I think it would be wise for you to reconsider your actions before this escalates further." James placed a gentle hand on Patterson's arm. "Thank you, sir, but we don't want to cause trouble. We'll find somewhere else to eat." Patterson looked at James with quiet determination. "You're not the ones causing trouble, Mr. Carter. But this isn't something I can let slide." Greg, visibly uncomfortable, stammered, "Mr. Patterson, if you have concerns, we can address them privately." "That's enough," Patterson interrupted. His voice was calm but firm. "You've already said more than necessary." Turning to James and Evelyn, he softened. "Please, allow me to ensure your evening is salvaged. Follow me." Without waiting for Greg's input, Patterson gestured toward a table near the window, one of the best spots in the restaurant. "Samantha," Patterson called to a nearby waitress. "Would you kindly set this table for the Carter family?" Samantha hesitated, glancing nervously at Greg, whose face was now a deep shade of red.
Mr. Patterson, this is highly irregular, Greg began, his voice rising.
Patterson silenced him with a sharp glare.
You forget yourself, Greg.
This is my establishment, and any concerns I have will be addressed immediately and publicly, if necessary. As Samantha set the table, Patterson turned back to James and Evelyn. Please, sit. Tonight, your meal is on me.
Evelyn looked at James, who gave her a reassuring nod. Thank you, James said quietly as he guided his family to the table. The children's eyes lit up at the elegant setup, their initial nerves beginning to ease. Greg, meanwhile, stormed toward the kitchen, his composure unraveling. Patterson leaned toward James and said softly, I'd like you to enjoy your dinner, but I'll speak with you afterward.
There's more to this than meets the eye. James raised an eyebrow but didn't question him.
As the Carters settled into their seats, the tension in the restaurant didn't dissipate, it shifted. Whispers and curious glances from other diners filled the air. Meanwhile, Patterson returned to his table, his expression unreadable as he kept an eye on Greg, who was now pacing furiously in the kitchen. Evelyn reached across the table to hold James's hand. This is a beautiful table, she said softly, trying to brighten the mood. James gave her a small smile but remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the room for any further signs of trouble.
Samantha approached cautiously with a tray of water glasses. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the table. Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I'll be your server tonight. If there's anything I can do to make your evening more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask. Evelyn smiled warmly. Thank you, Samantha. You've already done more than enough.
As Samantha poured the water, her eyes flickered toward the kitchen, where Greg stood whispering furiously to another staff member. Her nervousness was evident, but she quickly straightened up and returned to the bar. In the kitchen, Greg's anger boiled over. He hissed to the sous chef, "Who does Patterson think he is, undermining me like this? This is my restaurant to manage, not his playground." The sous chef glanced up briefly. "You're making a scene, Greg. Maybe you should let it go." Greg's eyes narrowed. Let it go? That man just humiliated me in front of everyone. He paused, glancing around to ensure no one else overheard. No, this isn't over. Back at the table, James and Evelyn exchanged quiet glances. Something's off, James muttered under his breath. Patterson's help is appreciated, but there's more going on here. Evelyn nodded, her unease growing. Do you think we should leave? Not yet, James replied, his tone cautious. Let's see how this plays out. Patterson seems to have some control over the situation. A moment later, Patterson rose from his table and walked into the kitchen, his demeanor calm but authoritative. The tension in the restaurant seemed to thicken as he disappeared behind the swinging doors. In the kitchen, Patterson's calm exterior gave way to a commanding presence. Greg turned abruptly, his anger barely contained. What exactly do you think you're doing, barging into my kitchen? Greg snapped. Patterson folded his arms, his gaze unwavering. Your kitchen? Interesting choice of words. Let me remind you, Greg, that everything in this restaurant, including the kitchen, is under my ownership. And right now, what I own is being tainted by your behavior. Greg scoffed. Unacceptable? I've been running this place for years. I know what's best for the restaurant. Patterson stepped closer, his voice lowering but losing none of its intensity. You think this is about authority? No, Greg, this is about the reputation of this establishment. Discrimination has no place here. Your behavior toward the Carter family tonight was not only unethical, it was illegal. Greg's face twisted with anger. Discrimination? Don't try to lecture me. I was protecting the image of the restaurant. People like them don't belong here. They don't fit the clientele we're trying to attract. The words hung in the air like a slap. Patterson's jaw tightened as he stepped even closer, his voice now razor-sharp. You've just proven my point. You're not protecting this restaurant, you're destroying it.
And you've crossed the line one too many times. Greg's face paled slightly as the weight of Patterson's words sank in. He stepped back, trying to regain control. You can't fire me over this. I've built this place. No, Greg, Patterson said coldly. I built this place. And now, you're done. Effective immediately, you're to collect your things and leave. Security will escort you if necessary. Greg opened his mouth to argue but found no words. Patterson's tone left no room for negotiation. Furious, Greg stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Patterson exhaled slowly and turned to the sous chef, who had been pretending not to listen. Keep things running smoothly tonight, he instructed. Samantha will handle the Carter family's table. Yes, sir, the sous chef replied, his respect for Patterson evident in his tone. When Patterson returned to the dining room, the drama hadn't gone unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the restaurant as diners stole glances toward the kitchen. Patterson's expression was composed as he approached the Carter family's table. My apologies for the disruption, he said, his tone polite but weary. Now, where were we? Before anyone could respond, the restaurant doors swung open, and Greg marched back in, flanked by two men in dark suits. A hush fell over the room as the men scanned the restaurant, their gazes landing on Patterson. Greg smirked triumphantly. Mr. Patterson, he called out, his voice carrying mock civility, I thought I'd invite some friends of mine to help sort this situation out. James and Evelyn exchanged uneasy glances as Greg gestured to the men beside him. These gentlemen are my legal advisors. They're here to ensure that any decisions made tonight are lawful. Unfazed, Patterson stepped forward. Greg, he said evenly, you're digging yourself deeper into a hole you can't climb out of. Bringing in legal advisors over this is not only unnecessary, it's laughable. One of the men cleared his throat. Mr. Patterson, we're here to ensure that any termination of Mr. Whitman's employment is lawful and doesn't violate his rights as a manager. Patterson let out a dry chuckle. Greg isn't a manager anymore. He's been relieved of his duties, effective immediately. Right now, he's trespassing, and you're enabling him. Greg's bravado faltered as two uniformed security guards entered the restaurant. Patterson gestured toward Greg. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Whitman off the premises. He's no longer employed here. The guards flanked Greg, who sputtered in protest. You'll regret this, Patterson. This isn't over. Patterson remained resolute. You're right, it's not over. But it's over for you. As Greg was escorted out, the restaurant erupted into murmurs. Some diners clapped quietly, while others simply stared, stunned by the events. Patterson turned back to James and Evelyn. Thank you for your patience, he said with a faint smile. Now, let's ensure the rest of your evening is truly worth remembering. The restaurant gradually settled back into a cautious hum of conversation as Patterson returned to the Carter's table. His sharp demeanor softened, and he spoke with measured sincerity. I appreciate your patience tonight, he began. This isn't the kind of experience I want anyone to have here, especially a family as dignified as yours. James leaned back slightly, studying Patterson's expression. We appreciate what you've done so far, but I can't help but wonder why go through all this trouble. You could have avoided this public drama altogether. Patterson gave a small nod, acknowledging the validity of James's question. You're not wrong, he admitted. It would have been easier to handle this quietly. But sometimes, things need to be addressed openly, especially when they've been ignored for too long. Evelyn tilted her head, curiosity in her voice. What do you mean by ignored? Ignored by who? Patterson sighed deeply, his gaze briefly scanning the room before refocusing on James and Evelyn. I bought this restaurant a year ago, he explained. At the time, Greg was already in charge of operations. On paper, he seemed like a strong leader, experienced, efficient, and able to deliver results. But over time, I began hearing whispers. Staff complaints. Subtle dissatisfaction from certain customers. Signs that something wasn't right. James frowned slightly. And yet, you let him stay? I wanted to act, Patterson said, his voice tinged with regret. But Greg was clever. He kept his worst behavior just out of view, always maintaining plausible deniability. Every complaint I investigated came down to a lack of hard evidence. Tonight, however, he finally slipped. His prejudice was on full display, and not even he could spin it. Your situation forced his hand. James narrowed his eyes slightly, his instincts telling him there was still more to the story. And what happens now? Patterson's faint smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Now, I make sure this restaurant becomes the kind of place where no family has to experience what you just went through. He paused, leaning forward slightly. But that might require a more immediate change than I originally planned. Before James could press further, the front doors swung open again. Greg stormed back in, followed by two men in dark suits. The room seemed to hold its breath as the trio marched toward the center of the restaurant. Patterson straightened, his jaw tightening. It seems the game isn't over yet, he said quietly to James, rising to his feet. Greg's voice cut through the murmurs. Mr. Patterson, I thought we could use some outside perspective to help resolve this situation. The men in suits stepped forward, one addressing Patterson directly. Mr. Patterson, we're here to ensure any decisions made tonight are in line with legal standards. Terminating Mr. Whitman without due process could expose the business to significant liability. Patterson raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Due process? Greg's actions tonight are grounds enough for termination. Refusing service based on race isn't just unethical, it's illegal. I'd be well within my rights to have him removed by security. Which, as you've already seen, I've done. Greg smirked, attempting to regain his confidence. You wouldn't dare drag me out in front of all these people again. Patterson's smile turned cold. Try me. A hush fell over the restaurant as Patterson gestured toward the front door. On cue, two uniformed security guards stepped back inside. Without waiting for further theatrics, Patterson motioned to Greg. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Whitman off the premises. He is no longer employed here. Greg sputtered in protest, his bravado crumbling. You'll regret this, Patterson. You think you're untouchable, but this isn't the last you've seen of me. The guards flanked Greg, guiding him toward the door. Patterson's expression didn't waver as he replied, You're right, Greg. It isn't the last we've seen of you. But it is the last time you'll set foot in this establishment. The door slammed shut behind Greg, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Patterson exhaled deeply, smoothing his jacket as he returned to the Carter family's table. My apologies for the scene, he said, his tone calm once more. Now, where were we? James, impressed by Patterson's composure, leaned forward. You've handled a lot tonight, Mr. Patterson. I'm starting to wonder why you've taken such a personal interest in this situation. Patterson smiled faintly, gesturing for James and Evelyn to follow him to a quieter corner of the restaurant. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed behind at the table. Once seated, Patterson spoke earnestly. What happened tonight was a wake-up call, not just for Greg, but for me as well. I've always envisioned this restaurant as a place where everyone feels welcome. But it's clear to me now that changes are overdue. And to make those changes, I need people I can trust. Evelyn tilted her head, her curiosity deepening. What kind of changes are you talking about? Patterson hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, I want to offer you the opportunity to take ownership of this restaurant. The words landed heavily. Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise, while James leaned back, his expression unreadable. Ownership? James repeated, his tone calm but skeptical. You're offering us the restaurant? Patterson nodded. Yes. I've been planning to step back from active ownership for some time now. But I needed the right people to take over. After seeing how you handled tonight with composure, patience, and dignity, I'm confident that you're the right people. Evelyn found her voice, though it was quiet. That's a generous offer, Mr. Patterson. But we've never run a restaurant before. Why us? Because leadership isn't just about experience, Patterson replied. It's about character.
You're smart, resilient, and capable of handling challenges with grace. The operational side can be learned. I'll ensure you have the support and resources to succeed. But the heart of a business like this is its people. And I believe you have what it takes to inspire and lead them. James remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Patterson. This is a lot to take in, he admitted. You're asking us to take on something huge. What's the catch? Patterson smiled faintly. No catch. But there is a condition. If you agree, I want you to commit to making this restaurant a reflection of inclusivity and community. Build a team that reflects your values. Ensure no one ever experiences what you went through tonight. Evelyn reached for James's hand, her voice steady but filled with emotion. This could change everything, James. James nodded slowly, his mind racing. It's an incredible offer, he said finally. But it's not something we can decide on the spot. Of course, Patterson replied. Take some time to think it over. I'll have my attorney draft the terms, and we can revisit this when you're ready. James and Evelyn exchanged glances, their minds racing with the weight of Patterson's offer. As Patterson stood to leave, he gave them a polite nod. Whatever your decision, know that I have the utmost respect for you both, he said before walking back to his table. James turned to Evelyn, his voice low. What do you think, Evelyn? It's a life-changing decision. Evelyn smiled faintly, though her eyes were filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. It's a lot, James. But think about what this could mean for us, for the kids. It's not just a restaurant, it's a chance to build something meaningful. James sighed, leaning back in his chair. Let's sleep on it. We'll talk in the morning and give him our answer then. Evelyn nodded, satisfied with the decision. The children, oblivious to the weight of their parents' conversation, eagerly chose their desserts, chocolate mousse for one, cheesecake for the other. As they laughed and dug into their treats, the Carters found a moment of calm amidst the storm of possibilities. For the rest of the evening, James and Evelyn set the decision aside, focusing on their children's laughter and the unexpected warmth that had returned to their evening. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as James sat at the table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Evelyn stood by the stove, flipping pancakes for the kids, but her focus kept drifting to James. She could see the weight of the decision etched in his expression. You've been quiet all morning, Evelyn said gently, breaking the silence. What's on your mind? James exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. I've been running through every possible scenario. What if this is too big for us? What if we fail? What if Patterson's offer isn't as straightforward as it seems? Evelyn turned off the stove, setting the pan aside as she walked over to him. James, I get it. This is a huge leap, and we don't have all the answers. But we've faced challenges before. If there's anyone who can handle this, it's you. James looked up at her, his expression softening. You always make things sound so simple. It's not simple, Evelyn admitted. But it's worth it. Think about what this could mean for us, for the kids. And not just for us, you saw Samantha last night. This isn't just about running a restaurant. It's about giving people like her a place where they're respected. James nodded slowly, her words settling into his mind. You're right. It's more than just a business. It's a chance to make a difference. Their conversation was interrupted by the children rushing into the kitchen, excitedly chatting about breakfast. Evelyn smiled, returning to the stove, while James watched his kids with a renewed sense of purpose. By the time breakfast was over, James's determination had solidified. Standing by the window, he turned to Evelyn, his voice steady. I think it's time to give Patterson our answer. Evelyn smiled, pride shining in her eyes. Let's do it. Returning to the restaurant. Within the hour, the Carters were dressed and ready. They dropped the children off with Evelyn's sister and headed to the restaurant. The drive was filled with quiet anticipation as they mentally prepared for the next step. As they pulled into the parking lot, James took a deep breath. Are we really doing this? Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his arm.
We are together.
Inside, Patterson was waiting at the bar, a stack of papers neatly arranged beside him.
He stood as they approached, his smile warm but professional.
I had a feeling I'd see you today, Patterson said.
James extended his hand, shaking Patterson's firmly.
We've thought it over, he said, his voice steady.
We're ready to take the leap. Patterson's smile widened. You've made the right choice. Let's sit down and talk through the next steps.
They moved to a nearby table, where Patterson explained the agreement in detail. This document outlines the transfer of ownership, he said, gesturing to the papers.
You'll take over all operations, including staff and assets. There's no financial buy-in required. However, I have 2 conditions. James nodded. What are they? First, Patterson began, this restaurant must reflect the values of inclusivity and community. That means rebuilding the culture Greg damaged and ensuring everyone feels welcome.
Second, I'd like to remain a silent partner for the first year, not to interfere, but to provide guidance and support as you get started.
Evelyn glanced at James, relief evident in her expression.
That seems fair, she said.
But why are you stepping back? You seem so invested in this place. Patterson's expression softened, a hint of vulnerability breaking through.
I've been in this business for over 3 decades, he explained.
This restaurant has been my pride and joy. But the truth is, I'm tired. My priorities have shifted. I want to spend more time with my family. But I couldn't just leave it in anyone's hands. I needed someone who could carry on its legacy while making it their own. And after seeing how you handled yourselves last night, I knew you were the right people.
James and Evelyn exchanged a long look, silently communicating as they had so many times before.
Finally, James nodded. We're in, he said.
Patterson extended his hand, and James shook it firmly.
Then let's make it official, Patterson said with a smile.
Patterson motioned for his attorney, Mr. Hargrove, to join them. The sharply dressed man approached with a clipboard in hand, his movements precise and professional.
He explained each section of the agreement in clear, concise terms, ensuring James and Evelyn understood every detail.
As they reviewed the documents, Patterson leaned back slightly, observing them with a calm but encouraging demeanor.
Take your time, he said. This is a big decision, and I want you to feel confident about it.
James and Evelyn carefully read through the papers, occasionally exchanging thoughts in hushed tones.
Once they were satisfied, James picked up the pen and signed his name, followed by Evelyn. Patterson raised his glass of water in a symbolic toast.
To new beginnings, he said warmly. James and Evelyn lifted their glasses in response, the weight of the decision settling over them. While it was daunting, it also felt right. With the paperwork signed, Patterson clapped James on the shoulder. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. You're officially the new owners of this restaurant. Evelyn smiled, but her voice carried a hint of apprehension. What's our first step?
Patterson's expression grew serious but supportive. Your first step is to meet the team. Get to know the people who make this place run.
Most of them are hardworking and loyal, but Greg's leadership created a toxic environment. You'll need to rebuild trust. Evelyn nodded, already formulating ideas in her head. We'll start by listening to them, understanding their concerns and showing them that things are going to be different. Exactly, Patterson agreed. He gestured toward the bar, where Samantha and a few other staff members lingered, their curiosity evident.
Why don't we start with introductions? James and Evelyn followed Patterson to the bar.
Samantha, hands clasped nervously in front of her, smiled shyly as they approached. It's wonderful to meet you both, she said earnestly.
I'm Samantha.
I've been here for a little over 3 years.
James shook her hand. Thank you, Samantha. We're looking forward to working with you.
Next, a middle-aged man wearing a chef's apron approached, his hands dusted with flour. I'm Marco, the head chef, he said gruffly but not unkindly.
I've been here since the place opened. If you need to know anything about the kitchen, I'm your guy.
Evelyn offered him a warm smile.
We're grateful to have someone with your experience, Marco. We'll definitely lean on you as we get up to speed.
One by one, the staff introduced themselves, the atmosphere gradually shifting from guarded to cautiously optimistic.
Patterson observed the interactions, a satisfied look on his face.
The team's a good one, he said.
They'll come around once they see your vision in action. Now, I'll leave you to get settled. Remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need anything. James extended his hand. Thank you for trusting us with this. We won't let you down.
I know you won't, Patterson replied with a smile before heading for the exit. As the door closed behind him, James and Evelyn stood together, surveying the restaurant.
The space suddenly felt larger, the weight of their new responsibilities looming in their minds.
Evelyn touched James's arm, her voice soft but confident.
We've got a lot of work ahead, but I know we can do this.
James nodded, determination shining in his eyes.
Let's get started. Building trust. The following days were a whirlwind. Patterson had arranged a series of transition meetings to familiarize James and Evelyn with the restaurant's operations.
They reviewed vendor contracts, learned the inventory systems, and poured over financial reports. It was overwhelming, but they tackled it together, leaning on each other's strengths. James spent hours in the back office, poring over spreadsheets and ledgers. Numbers weren't his strong suit, but he was determined to understand the business inside and out.
Evelyn, meanwhile, took a hands-on approach.
She spent time with the staff in the dining room and kitchen, observing their routines and offering help where needed. On their third day, Evelyn found Samantha at the bar, organizing drink menus. The young waitress still seemed hesitant, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Evelyn approached her with a warm smile. Samantha, can I have a moment? Samantha straightened, nodding quickly.
Of course, Mrs. Carter. Please, call me Evelyn, she said gently.
I just wanted to thank you.
You've been such a steady presence during this transition.
It's made a huge difference.
Samantha blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear.
Thank you. I'm really glad things are changing. It already feels different around here. Evelyn's smile widened. That's what we're aiming for.
And I want you to know, if you ever have any concerns or suggestions, my door is always open. Samantha nodded, her smile growing more confident.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Evelyn.
Meanwhile, James was meeting with Marco in the bustling kitchen. Orders for the lunch rush were streaming in, but Marco had carved out a moment to discuss the menu. Greg wasn't a fan of change, Marco said bluntly, flipping through a binder of recipes. He wanted everything done his way, even when customers asked for something different.
But I've got some ideas if you're open to refreshing the menu.
James leaned against the counter, intrigued.
What kind of ideas?
Marco's eyes lit up as he pulled out a sheet of handwritten notes.
Seasonal specials.
Dishes that reflect the diversity of the neighborhood.
People love seeing their culture represented on the menu. James nodded thoughtfully. That sounds great. Let's set up a tasting.
If the team's on board and the dishes work, we'll make it happen. Marco grinned, his enthusiasm palpable.
You've got it, boss.
By the end of the week, the Carters began noticing small but meaningful changes in the restaurant. Staff who had once seemed withdrawn started engaging more openly. Diners lingered longer, complimenting the service and atmosphere. Even regulars who had been wary of the new ownership began warming up, commenting on the renewed energy of the place. One evening, as James and Evelyn walked through the dining room, Samantha approached them with a smile. I just wanted to show you this, she said, holding up a comment card. James took it, reading the handwritten note aloud. The new energy in this place is incredible.
It feels like a community now, not just a restaurant. Evelyn's eyes glistened with pride. That's exactly what we hoped for. James handed the card back to Samantha with a smile. Thank you for sharing this. It means a lot.
As the night wound down and the last customers left, James and Evelyn sat together at a table, looking around the quiet dining room. This is just the beginning, James said, his voice steady but filled with hope.
Evelyn nodded, resting her hand on his.
We're building something real here, together. A Friday night challenge. Despite the progress, the road ahead wasn't without its challenges.
On a busy Friday evening, the dining room buzzed with activity. But James noticed an unusual tension in the air.
Orders were coming out slower than usual, and some of the servers seemed frazzled. Evelyn approached James near the host stand, her brow furrowed. Something's off, she said quietly.
I noticed, James replied, scanning the room. Let's check the kitchen. Inside, the normally orchestrated chaos had turned into outright confusion. Marco stood by the stove, barking orders as two cooks scrambled to catch up.
A server hovered nearby, nervously waiting for an overdue dish. Evelyn stepped in, her voice firm but calm.
Marco, can we talk for a moment?
Marco glanced up, frustration clear on his face.
It's not a good time, Evelyn. We're in the weeds.
I can see that, Evelyn said, stepping closer.
But we need to figure out why. Marco sighed, lowering his voice. We're short-staffed tonight. One of the line cooks called out last minute.
Greg never let me hire backups when I asked months ago, and now we're stretched too thin. Evelyn nodded, her expression understanding.
Okay, what do you need from us to get through tonight? Marco hesitated, and used to management offering direct help.
Honestly, if someone could run food or help with plating, it would free up my team to focus on cooking.
Without hesitation, Evelyn said, done.
She stepped back into the dining room, quickly flagging down James. We need to step in, she explained.
Marco's short-staffed, and the kitchen's falling behind. James nodded, rolling up his sleeves. Tell me what to do. Evelyn joined the kitchen crew, assisting with plating dishes and checking orders. Her movements were quick and precise, surprising even Marco with her efficiency. Meanwhile, James took to the dining room, running plates to tables and interacting with customers. His charm and genuine apologies for the delays eased any tension among diners. Samantha, seeing the Carters working alongside the staff, rallied the servers. Let's pick it up, everyone,
she called, her confidence infecting the team.
Within an hour, the backlog was cleared, and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm.
The kitchen staff, though exhausted, looked relieved.
Marco gave Evelyn a thumbs up.
Thanks for stepping in, he said, his tone softer now.
I didn't think we'd pull through tonight. Evelyn smiled. We're a team, Marco.
That's how it works.
At the last table of the night, James personally delivered an order of dessert to an older couple.
The man smiled warmly as James set down the plates. You don't see many owners stepping in like that, he remarked.
It says a lot about the kind of place you're building.
James straightened, his smile genuine.
Thank you.
That's exactly what we're aiming for, a place where everyone feels cared for, staff and customers alike. As the final diners left and the staff began cleaning up, exhaustion hit James and Evelyn. Sitting together at the bar, they sipped glasses of water, watching Samantha and Marco animatedly discuss menu ideas for the coming week. You know, James said, leaning back, this wasn't exactly what I imagined when we took this on.
Evelyn laughed softly. Me neither. But I wouldn't change a thing.
James reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We're making it work, Ev, one step at a time.
Evelyn glanced toward Samantha and Marco.
And we're not alone, she said, her voice filled with pride. This team, they're starting to believe in what we're building. James nodded, his eyes bright with determination.
Then let's keep giving them a reason to believe. Over the next week, James and Evelyn began implementing changes to bring their vision for the restaurant to life.
Inspired by Marco's suggestions, they introduced a rotating menu of seasonal specials that celebrated the cultural diversity of the surrounding neighborhood. The announcement was met with excitement from the staff and curiosity from customers, who eagerly inquired about the upcoming dishes.
James also focused on rebuilding trust among the staff.
He organized a team meeting, gathering everyone in the dining room after closing one evening. The group, ranging from longtime employees like Marco to newer hires, sat around the room with expressions of cautious optimism. Standing at the front, James clasped his hands in front of him, his voice steady.
First, I want to thank all of you. This past week has been a whirlwind, but your hard work has kept this place running. Evelyn and I couldn't have done it without you.
A few murmurs of appreciation rippled through the room, though many remained quiet, waiting to see where the conversation would go. We know the previous leadership didn't always make this an easy place to work, James continued.
Some of you may be wondering if things are really going to change. Let me assure you, they will.
Evelyn stepped forward, her voice warm but firm.
That means open communication. If you have concerns, ideas, or feedback, we want to hear them. We're here to listen and work with you to make this place better for everyone.
Marco raised a hand, his gruff voice cutting through the quiet.
What about staffing?
We've been stretched thin for months. If we're going to handle these new menu changes, we'll need more people in the kitchen.
James nodded. You're absolutely right, Marco. We've already started reaching out to candidates, and we'll be hiring additional staff in the coming weeks. We want to make sure no one is overworked or unsupported. Samantha spoke up next, her tone hesitant but hopeful.
What about Greg's rules? He was strict about how we handled customers, even when they were unreasonable.
Will that change? Evelyn smiled gently. Yes, it will. We trust your judgment, Samantha, and everyone else's.
If a customer is being unfair or inappropriate, you'll have our full support to handle the situation respectfully but firmly.
No one should have to endure mistreatment.
A ripple of relief passed through the room. Slowly, the walls of doubt began to crack.
Samantha's smile grew more confident, and even Marco leaned back in his chair, his posture more relaxed.
James glanced around the room, his voice steady as he delivered his final message.
This transformation won't happen overnight. It will take time, effort, and patience.
But Evelyn and I are committed to this place and to all of you. Together, we're going to make this restaurant into something we can all be proud of.
As the meeting ended, the staff dispersed to finish their closing duties with a renewed sense of purpose. Samantha lingered behind, approaching James and Evelyn with a shy smile.
I just wanted to say thank you, she began.
It feels good to finally believe in this place again.
James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder.
That means more than you know, Samantha. We couldn't do this without you.
Later that night, as James and Evelyn locked up the restaurant, they couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, it felt like they were truly moving forward, not just as owners, but as leaders.
Evelyn glanced at James as they stepped outside. We're building something special here, aren't we?
James nodded, his expression resolute.
Yes, we are.
And it's just the beginning.
The transformation takes root.
Months passed, and the transformation of the restaurant became evident in every corner. The once tense and oppressive atmosphere had given way to one that was warm and inviting. The staff worked as a cohesive team, bonded by trust and mutual respect. The new menu was a hit, drawing in a diverse crowd who appreciated the restaurant's celebration of local cultures. Word of the changes spread quickly, and reservations were often booked weeks in advance. James and Evelyn had settled into their roles. Evelyn oversaw the front-of-house operations, ensuring both staff and customers felt cared for. James, now confident in handling the financial and logistical aspects of the business, made it a point to connect with every team member and diner who walked through the doors. One evening, as the restaurant bustled with activity, a man stepped inside. His hesitant demeanor and sheepish expression immediately caught James's attention. It was Greg. Evelyn joined James near the entrance, her expression unreadable as she also recognized their former adversary.
Greg approached slowly, his usual swagger replaced by discomfort. James. Evelyn, he began quietly.
I heard about the changes you've made here, and I wanted to see it for myself. James exchanged a glance with Evelyn, then addressed Greg evenly. Good of you to stop by, he said, his tone polite but firm. We've been busy making sure this place reflects the values it should have had all along.
Greg nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. I can see that. The staff looks happy. The customers. It's not like when I was here. He hesitated, then added, I wanted to apologize. For the way I treated you that night and for everything else. I know I can't undo what I did, but I've been trying to make some changes in my own life. Evelyn softened slightly, her voice calm but measured. We appreciate the apology, Greg. What happened that night pushed us into something we never expected, but it also gave us a chance to build something better. Greg nodded again, his expression genuine. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I mean that. James studied him for a moment, then offered a small nod. The best thing you can do is take what you've learned and do better moving forward. Greg smiled faintly, gratitude in his eyes. I will. As Greg left, James and Evelyn returned to the dining room, where Samantha waved them over to a table of regular customers who wanted to compliment the latest special. Looking around at the laughter, the chatter, and the satisfied faces of diners and staff alike, James felt a swell of pride. This is it, Evelyn said softly. This is what we dreamed of. James took her hand, squeezing it gently. It's not just a restaurant anymore. It's a place where people feel like they belong. As the last diners left and the staff cleaned up for the night, James and Evelyn stood together near the door. Ready to head home? Evelyn asked, resting her head on James's shoulder. Not quite, James replied, a small smile playing on his lips. I just want to soak this in for a moment. Evelyn nodded, her own smile mirroring his. Together, they stood in quiet pride, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The challenges, doubts, and even the pain of that first humiliating night had all led to this: a thriving restaurant, a united team, and a dream fulfilled. As the lights dimmed and the doors locked behind them, the Carters stepped out into the cool night air, their hearts full of hope and determination. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they could face it together. The future was theirs, and they were ready. The changes James and Evelyn had implemented began to take hold, and the restaurant started to feel like a completely different place. The oppressive tension that once filled the air had been replaced by a warmth that was hard to ignore. The staff, once wary and withdrawn, were now working together with renewed energy and trust. Customers noticed too, leaving positive reviews and spreading the word about the restaurant's transformation. One evening, as the dining room hummed with activity, a man entered quietly. His hesitant demeanor and familiar face caught James's attention immediately. It was Greg. Evelyn joined James at the entrance, her expression neutral as they watched him approach. Greg seemed smaller than they remembered, his usual bravado replaced by unease. James, Evelyn, he began, his voice softer than they'd ever heard. I just wanted to stop by. I've been hearing about all the changes you've made, and I wanted to see it for myself. James and Evelyn exchanged a glance before James spoke. Good of you to stop by, he said evenly. We've been busy making sure this place reflects the values it should have had all along. Greg nodded, his gaze dropping. I can see that. The staff looks happy. The customers, too. It's not like when I was here. He hesitated, then added, I came to apologize. For that night, and for everything else. I know I can't undo what I did, but I've been trying to change, trying to be better. Evelyn softened slightly, though her tone remained steady. We appreciate the apology, Greg. What happened that night pushed us to make changes we never anticipated. And because of that, this place is better for it. Greg's eyes met theirs, a hint of genuine remorse in his expression. If there's ever anything I can do to help, let me know. I mean it. James studied him for a moment before nodding. The best thing you can do, Greg, is to take what you've learned and do better moving forward. Greg smiled faintly, his gratitude clear. I will. As Greg left, James and Evelyn turned back toward the dining room. Samantha waved them over to a table where a group of regular customers was praising the new seasonal dishes. The restaurant was alive with chatter and laughter, the energy of the room infectious. James took a moment to observe the scene, the smiling faces of diners, the confident strides of the staff as they worked the floor. This is it, Evelyn said quietly, standing beside him. This is what we dreamed of. James reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. It's not just a restaurant anymore. It's a place where people feel like they belong. As the last diners left and the staff began cleaning up for the night, James and Evelyn sat together at the bar, sipping water and reflecting on how far they'd come. You know, James said, leaning back, when Patterson first made his offer, I thought we might be crazy to say yes. But now. Evelyn smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Now, it feels like we made the right choice. Even with all the bumps along the way. James looked around the quieting restaurant, the soft glow of the lights casting a peaceful warmth over the space. We did. And it's just the beginning. Over the following months, the changes James and Evelyn had envisioned became fully realized. The new seasonal menu was a hit, attracting a steady stream of customers from all walks of life. Regulars raved about the fresh, innovative dishes, while newcomers marveled at the restaurant's welcoming atmosphere. The staff, once hesitant and cautious, now worked like a well-oiled machine. Team meetings became a space for open dialogue, where everyone felt heard and valued. Samantha, who had grown into a confident leader, began mentoring new hires, passing on the same sense of trust and respect she had received. Marco, energized by the freedom to experiment, introduced new specials that celebrated the neighborhood's cultural diversity. His passion was evident in every dish, and customers frequently asked to meet the chef behind their meals. James and Evelyn split their responsibilities seamlessly. Evelyn, with her natural warmth and charisma, oversaw the front of house, ensuring the staff felt supported and the diners left satisfied. James, who had become increasingly confident in his ability to manage the business, focused on operations and logistics, ensuring everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. The restaurant's success didn't go unnoticed. It became a centerpiece of the community, a place where locals gathered to celebrate milestones or simply enjoy a meal with loved ones. One evening, after the last customers had left, James and Evelyn locked the doors and stood together in the now quiet dining room. It's hard to believe how far we've come, Evelyn said, her voice filled with wonder. James smiled, looking around the space that had once been a source of pain and now was a symbol of triumph. We've turned this place into something we can be proud of. And we did it together. Evelyn leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Whatever comes next, I know we can handle it. James nodded, his resolve unwavering. Absolutely. The future is ours. As they walked out into the cool night air, the glow of the restaurant's sign cast a warm light behind them. It was more than just a business now, it was a beacon of what was possible when dignity, determination, and community came together. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Together, they were ready for whatever lay ahead. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation of the restaurant continued to unfold, becoming more deeply ingrained with each passing day. James and Evelyn's leadership had given the staff a sense of purpose and camaraderie that hadn't been present under the old regime. It was clear that they were creating something more than just a successful business, they were building a community. One particular evening, as the restaurant buzzed with its usual energy, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Mr. Patterson, the former owner, now a silent partner, but his presence still felt significant. He hadn't been a regular fixture in the restaurant since he had stepped back, but tonight, he had come in to see how things were going. James noticed him immediately. Patterson made his way across the dining room, his calm demeanor as composed as ever. His eyes met James's, and there was a silent acknowledgement between them. Mr. Patterson, James greeted him as he approached. Patterson smiled warmly. James. Evelyn. I just wanted to see how everything's going. I've been hearing nothing but good things. Evelyn, who had been greeting a few customers, joined James at the table. It's been a journey, she said with a smile. But we're getting there. Patterson took a seat at the table, his gaze shifting around the room, taking in the bustling atmosphere. I can tell. This place feels different. Alive. He paused, then added with a chuckle, it's certainly come a long way from the night you almost walked out. James laughed softly. That's one way to put it. I still can't believe how quickly things changed after that. Patterson nodded, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes it takes a catalyst, something to force people to act.
And you acted with grace and integrity, even when it wasn't easy. Evelyn smiled, but there was a slight hesitation in her eyes.
We did what we had to do.
But it wasn't just us. It's the staff, the customers, and the community that have helped make this what it is.
We didn't do it alone. Patterson's gaze softened. I know.
But you two provided the leadership that everyone needed. You made them believe in something again. You made them believe in themselves. The conversation shifted to the future, and Patterson's tone grew more serious. I've been thinking about something, he said, leaning in slightly.
You've been doing a remarkable job here.
And it's clear this restaurant has a bright future.
I think it's time to take the next step. James and Evelyn exchanged a glance, sensing there was more to Patterson's words. What do you mean? James asked. Patterson took a deep breath. What if we expand? What if this restaurant becomes a chain? Not just here, but in other communities, other cities. You could take what you've built here, what you've learned, and share it with others. The idea hung in the air between them, a bold possibility that seemed too big to grasp at first. Expansion?
Evelyn repeated, her mind racing.
That's a huge leap. We've barely had time to fully settle in. Patterson nodded. I understand. It's a big step, but I think you two are ready for it. You've got the vision, the leadership, and the heart. This isn't just about the business, it's about creating more spaces where people feel valued and respected. James looked at Evelyn, his thoughts clearly moving faster than he could process them. It would be a lot to take on, but the idea of reaching more people, changing more lives, it's tempting. Evelyn nodded slowly. It's a lot to think about, but we've already proven we can turn things around once. Why not again? Patterson smiled, seeing the wheels turning in their minds. Exactly. You don't have to make a decision now. Just think about it. The right team, the right mindset, this could be the beginning of something bigger.
The conversation shifted again as James and Evelyn continued to discuss the idea.
Patterson's words lingered in their minds, but for now, they decided to focus on what was in front of them, continuing to grow the restaurant they had fought so hard to transform.
Over the next few months, James and Evelyn continued to hone their leadership, building the restaurant into a thriving business. They made improvements to the menu, expanded their offerings, and further invested in their staff. Samantha became a trusted leader in the front of house, Marco continued to innovate in the kitchen, and new team members brought fresh ideas that continued to elevate the restaurant's atmosphere. Then, one day, as James sat in the back office, reviewing financial reports, Evelyn came in with an idea that had been brewing in her mind for a while. I think we're ready, she said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. James looked up, sensing the change in her tone.
Ready for what? Evelyn smiled. I think it's time we take the leap. Expansion.
We've built something strong here, and I think we can share it with other communities.
James leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling in. For a moment, he didn't speak, simply taking in her words. He thought about everything they had been through, the struggles, the triumphs, the lessons they had learned along the way. Finally, he nodded. Let's do it. Evelyn's face lit up. Are you sure?
I'm sure, James said, his voice filled with certainty. We've built something special here, and it's time to share it with others. The decision was made, and the Carters began to lay the groundwork for their new venture. They started small, selecting a new location to open a second restaurant. They took all the lessons from their first restaurant and applied them to the new venture, maintaining the values of inclusivity and community at the core of their mission. As they opened the second location, they felt the same excitement and nervousness they had felt when they first took ownership of the original restaurant. But this time, they knew they were ready. The restaurant continued to grow, and with each new step, they were reminded of the journey that had brought them here. From the night they were turned away, humiliated, to this moment owning multiple locations and spreading their vision of a welcoming, inclusive space, it was clear that their work was just beginning. And the future, filled with possibility, was theirs for the taking.